Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in James chapter 4. We're going to be starting verse 2 this lesson. But before we begin, our theme verse for Lunch with the Lord, Jeremiah 15:16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them. And thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we begin here in verse 2, the context is where James is writing about wars. But the wars that he's talking about are wars that begin from within a person. That's where all wars begin. As he said in verse 1, where do wars come from? And then the last part of verse 1 says, even of your lusts that war in your members. The sinful nature that is within us is always the starting point for every single war in the history. And that means war at your work, war at school, war among your family members. It all begins in the sinful nature in the heart of men. Now, verse 2, he says, you lust and you have not, and you kill and you desire to have, and you cannot obtain. You fight and you war, yet you have not, because you ask not. Now, he says here, you lust. Now, this Greek word for lust is epithumeo, and it's in the present tense, and it means to have a desire of any kind. And the present tense means that they are always desiring this thing, even if they don't show it on the outside. So he says here, you lust. It means you have a craving within your heart that is continuously going on day after day after day, whether you let people know that you have it or not. So he says, you lust and you have not. And then he says, you kill. Now, the Greek word for kill is phroneo. And I'm sorry, not phroneo. It's phoneo. And it means to murder. And then he says, and you desire to have. And this Greek word is zeloo. And it means to be zealous for something, whether it's good or whether it's bad. And it speaks of killing because they have a strong desire or yearning for something. A strong desire or yearning for something. And they don't have it. Therefore, they want to kill to obtain it. And then he says here in verse 2, and you cannot obtain. Then he says, you fight and you war. And this here fighting and warring speaks of the eager desire to obtain something that their sinful nature wants. It's not enough not enough for these kind of people to just have the desire in their heart and let it be. No. They have this strong yearning desire to obtain this thing, and that desire impels it, motivates them to go out and to obtain it, however, even if it means killing. But of the three of these, the lusting and the killing and the fighting and warring, all end up with the same result. What do they end up with? They end up with, you have not, you cannot obtain, and yet you have not. But you may say, if a nation conquers another nation for, let's just say, because of its oil, they go out and they wage war of another nation because they want their oil, and they actually obtain it, then they got what they wanted. Isn't that true? Well, actually, it would seem to be true, except for the fact that the sinful nature within us is never satisfied. It always wants more. It is continuously craving. Yeah, okay, they go and they fight war and they obtain this country's oil or this country's wheat or this country's whatever. They obtain it. And you may say, okay, I guess they're done warring now. They're good for the rest of eternity. No, no, no. No, the sinful nature continues to crave. That once they obtain that country's things, then they want another country's things. And then another one after that. The sinful nature is never satisfied. And that's the same way with work, with people at work warring for a position, warring for more money. They want this, they want that. They keep pushing the envelope, and they keep trying to get as much as they can. It never ends. You could work 40, 50 years in the same place, never satisfied, never. God is the fulfillment of all of man's desire. Until we are released from this sinful body of death, we will always be craving more than what we have. Man was created by God to be fulfilled only by God. This is why Christians should look to Christ only for their fulfillment. Don't look to your pastor, don't look to your wife or your children or your husband. Don't look to your Bible study leader. Don't look to anybody. The music leader. Don't look to anybody for your fulfillment in this life. Only God. We were designed to be fulfilled by God only. Christ, listen, Christ is to be our life, not anyone else or anything else. Why is it that the luster and the killer and the fighter do not have? Why is it that these do not have? And it says here, because the last part of verse 2, because you ask not. Why don't they have these things? Because they don't ask. If people would honestly go to God and ask for his provisions and be satisfied with those provisions, then God would answer them. But the sinful, pleasure-seeking heart will not ask God for their pleasures. There are people who remain prayerless because they want to get it themselves. They don't want God's help, and they don't want God telling them that this is wrong for them to have it. They don't want God. God, I want this. I'm praying for this. I feel that I need this. It would be a blessing to me. And we don't want God saying, no, you can't have it. You're not ready for it yet. We don't want God saying no. We don't want to hear that. So we go get it anyway. So we don't even ask God. We just go ahead and obtain it. However, by whatever means, a person filled with lusts, envy, hatred, they cannot pray. They can't pray. And when James says that the reason why they do not have is because they do not ask God for it, James answers his question of verse 1. Where do wars and fightings come from among you? The end of verse 2 answers the question of verse 1. Where do fightings and wars come from among you? They come from your own sinful heart because you won't humble yourself and go to God and ask God for it. And trust God that whether he gives it or he doesn't give it, God is faithful. Are we going to be satisfied with that answer or not? Matthew chapter 7 and verse 7 says, ask, and it shall be given unto you. Now, God has promised to give to those that ask of him, not to those who war and fight. God says he promised that he will give to those who ask what? From him. From him. Not to those who go out and war and fight against other people or other nations. The problem with those who do not ask is because their heart is not submitted to God. There is no humility to receive God's provision. There's no humility. They have a lust in their heart for something, and they want it, and they're they're going to get it whether God gives it to them or not. And that's the problem. Verse 3 says, you ask and you receive not. Why? Because you ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your lusts. When all their lusting and killing and fighting does not produce the satisfaction of their sinful nature, then they try asking God for the things that they desire. But God does not give it to them. Why? Why is it when they try to get it themselves, they can't get it? So he says, well, I'll rub the genie thing and try to get him out and ask him, right? I'll go to God and I'll ask God for it. I mean, that's what he says, ask and you shall receive, right? So I'll go to God and I'll ask him for it. But God doesn't give it to them. Why? Because they ask with an evil heart. They're asking God for this thing with an evil heart. He says, you ask amiss. Now, this Greek word for amiss is kakos, and it means evil or grievous. So when it says they ask amiss, it means their intent has nothing to do with humility or with thanksgivings to God for that provision. Listen, when they ask for something, it's all about them. It's not about God and his will and his provisions and being a wonderful God. It's not about God. It's all about them and fulfilling their desires, the desires of their wicked heart. And the reason why they want what they want is so that they can spend it or use it however they want. They don't want to use it for God's glory, but to satisfy their own desires. There have been very few wars. Listen, there have been very few wars throughout history where the spoils of that war were used and dedicated to God. Very few wars where it was for God's honor and for his glory. Right? We're going to continue on in verse 4 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.